So today, we're diving into the history of psychedelics. But look, this isn't just some timeline of substances. It's really a story about humanity's ever-changing, kind of complicated relationship with the mind itself. A journey through curiosity, fear, healing, and control. Let's get into it.
Our source material kicks off with this really powerful thought, and it just perfectly sets the stage. The idea that these compounds aren't just chemicals, but that they somehow carry these deep, intricate stories about who we are and how we see the world.
And that's the key, right? Tracing this history is like holding up a mirror to ourselves. It shows us exactly how our views on mental health, on spirituality, and even on social power have just shifted so dramatically over time.
All right, so let's start at the very beginning. I mean, way back, long before the 20th century, just so we can understand the deep foundations of this whole story. What's just incredible is the sheer timescale we're talking about here. This is not some modern thing. We're talking millennia of humans encountering psychoactive plants. And over centuries, those encounters, well, they evolved into these highly structured, sacred rituals that we see in so many indigenous communities.
And in these early contexts, things like psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca or peyote, they weren't seen as drugs in the way we think of them now. Not at all. They were sacred tools, pathways to connect with the divine or to bring about some really deep healing, and always used within a guided ceremonial setting.
Okay, so let's jump forward now, into the 20th century. This is where the story takes a sharp turn, from the shaman ceremony straight into the scientist's laboratory.
So, everything really changed in 1938. You've got this Swiss chemist, Albert Hofmann, who first synthesizes LSD, but he has no idea what he's just created. It actually took 5 more years for him to accidentally, and then very intentionally, experience its profound effects. And that one, now famous bicycle ride home kicked off this massive wave of scientific research into the therapeutic potential of these compounds for, well, pretty much everything from depression to addiction.
And out of this whole scientific era came this absolutely crucial concept that is still fundamental today: set and setting. Researchers figured out really quickly that a person's mindset, their set, and their physical and social environment, their setting, were absolutely critical in shaping the entire psychedelic experience.
But just as all this promising research was gaining some incredible momentum, the cultural and political climate shifted dramatically, and it led to this sudden, really harsh backlash.
And here is where the conflict just exploded. On one side, you had science seeing these as powerful tools for psychiatry. But then, by the late 1960s, the wider culture was tying them to the counterculture, to political unrest, framing them as just dangerous recreational drugs. And in the court of public opinion, that second view, the one tied to fear and social change, it won. Big time.
And the consequences of this backlash? They were immediate, and they were severe. Governments all over the world just slapped these substances into the most restrictive category possible, Schedule I. And that action slammed the brakes on all scientific research. It completely cut off funding, and it created this deep public stigma that would last for decades.
But after all those decades of scientific silence, the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Starting back in the 90s and really picking up speed now, a quiet rebirth of research began, and it's led us to what a lot of people are calling the psychedelic renaissance.
So, what does this renaissance actually look like on the ground? Well, honestly, it reflects our own urgent search for better mental health treatments. We're seeing rigorous clinical research make a comeback. Psilocybin is showing incredible promise for treatment-resistant depression. MDMA is in the late stages of trials for PTSD. And maybe the most exciting part, neuroscience is starting to show us how these compounds can increase neuroplasticity, which is basically just the brain's ability to rewire itself, to form new connections. And that could be a total game changer for mental health.
And importantly, this isn't just happening in labs somewhere. The entire cultural conversation is slowly but surely shifting. The story is moving away from that old narrative of fear and prohibition and more toward a much more thoughtful discussion about understanding, about safety, and about mindful integration.
So let's pull all these threads together for a second. We've gone from ancient rituals to modern labs, through a huge backlash, and now into this new era of discovery. So what does this whole wild journey really reflect about us?
I want to leave you with this idea from the psychologist Carl Rogers. He said, "The good life is a process, not a state of being." And our source suggests that the very same thing could be said for our relationship with psychedelics. It's not about finding some final perfect answer, but about being engaged in this ongoing, evolving process of understanding.
Which of course brings us to a final question. This story is still being written, right now. As the research continues and the cultural conversation keeps evolving, what will the next chapter in this history reveal about our approach to consciousness, to healing, and to the human mind? That's a story that we are all a part of.